as she continues to go a little bit further, she finds herself, she's got a hunger now to really grow. She's taken that prophetic word really seriously, and so she's explored what we often call meditative prayer. There are different kinds of meditative prayer. So one of those is that she explores the whole thing of what we sometimes call Ignatian-style prayer. That's where you take a passage from the scriptures, usually the Gospels, and you reflect upon the story, and you imagine you're in the story. So when Jesus meets the woman at the well, you're the woman. Yeah? So when he talks to you, and then you enter into a conversation with him. Yeah? So that's one of the ways of meditative prayer. So another one is the ancient practice of Lectio Divina, where you take a passage from the scriptures and you read it slowly and you allow it to speak to you. And then you might talk to the Lord about that. So she's going deeper in prayer. She's moved beyond just formal prayers. Okay, maybe she once prayed some devotional sort of prayers, but she might still regularly pray those in some ways, but she's also really wanting to deepen in the scriptures. One of the great fruits of the baptism in the Spirit, isn't it? That the scriptures come alive for you. So she sits with the scriptures regularly and prays. And she reflects. When she reads a passage, like the one we had at the beginning of our time together, she says to herself, what's that mean? What's that mean for me? She asks herself those sorts of questions. Lord, how am I to be good soil? Might be part of her conversation. So the scripture feeds her prayer. And she's thinking about the different insights that she's having. One day she's praying with the story of Zacchaeus and she realises that she needs to come down from the tree and have lunch with Jesus. And in that she's deeply consoled and encouraged that he wants to have a meal with her. So that's something of her prayer now. You can see how it's grown, huh? There's a depth to it now. There's a quality to it. And we call it meditative prayer. And I wanted to just give you a little definition of that. This comes from the Catechism. The section in the Catechism on prayer is excellent. Okay? As a primer for prayer, as a way of explaining the Church's understanding of prayer, the section in the Catechism is very, very good. So this is part of what it says. It says that meditation is above all a quest. So do you get the sense there? This is something that I'm doing. I'm questing, I'm searching, yeah? The mind seeks to understand the why and the how of the Christian life in order to adhere and respond to what the Lord is asking. I want to give you a really important principle from the tradition here. It comes from Thomas Aquinas. He says, we can't love what we don't know. Can't love what we don't know. We can't love who we do not know. Yeah? So this is a desire to know the Lord more, to deepen in knowledge of him. Okay? And you can hear the mind's at work to understand the why and the how of Christian life in order to respond to what the Lord is calling us to. So God's initiative, God's grace is there, but there's an activity going on in us. We're using, remember Sue, she's using her mind. She's sitting with the scripture and she's saying, what's that mean? Or she's praying with her imagination and she's picturing a gospel scene. She's looking at the woman coming to the well on a hot day. Okay, so she's using her faculties, the parts of her, in order to respond to what God is asking. That's what this quote's saying. Does that make sense? Okay. The other thing that I would say about this that's really important is that sometimes what it can feel like is that the baptism in the Spirit just plonks you straight into something that God's doing. And he does that for a while. There's this wonderful, you'll come to prayer. We sometimes talk about it being like a honeymoon kind of phase, isn't it? You're walking on cloud nine, you think, God's so close. He's always going to be like this. And of course, one day he's not. And this is where we need to realise that perhaps maybe that was a little bit more like infatuation than really genuine love. And that we don't know him as well as we perhaps thought we did. And that's when this style of meditation becomes very important. Because we want to know the one that we've come to love. We want to really know him. Yeah? Okay. So this quote from the Catechism goes on. The required attentiveness is difficult to sustain. Ever found that in prayer? Yeah. You're very enthusiastic about that. You're sitting with the scripture, and this is beyond the beginnings. When you're first baptised in the Spirit, you're sitting in it and it just jumps out at you, the words, But when you've been trying to be faithful to it for a while, you're sitting there praying and you're thinking, oh, I was just thinking about my lunch. Or thinking about all the things I've got to do today. And so the required attentiveness of meditation is difficult to sustain. Just before we're ordained priests in the Missionaries of God's Love, we do a 30-day retreat in the Ignatian style. So for 30 days you pray for 5 hours a day, imagining scenes from the Gospels. And it's very rich. It's an extraordinary experience. But it's, believe me, I know what it means when it says it's difficult to sustain, okay? And you're working hard. The quotation goes on. In this kind of meditation, we're usually helped by books, particularly the sacred scriptures, but also holy icons, liturgical texts of the day, so taking the gospel of the day and praying with it, or of the season. So we're allowing ourselves to be nourished and fed. And I would say at this point too, and pass on to you one of the best pieces of advice that Father Ken ever gave me. He says that in the early stages of prayer, that to do some spiritual reading in addition to your prayer, not instead of, but in addition to your prayer, is at least as important as praying. It's a very important point. Okay? Now, good spiritual reading is probably an important distinction too. Pick the good stuff. Pick the good stuff. But we need that. We need to be nourished in that way, okay? So, this type of prayer, we're being fed and we're using our minds, particularly our intellect, to understand, our imagination to enter into these stories imaginatively in order to engage with God, in order to encounter him. So the purpose of it is to fall in love with him more, to discover him, to respond to what he's asking of us. But we're involved. Is that all making sense? Okay.
So